Hello, my name is Rinon and welcome to my guide for the 5th phase of the Omega Protocol Ultimate, the final Ultimate encounter released in Endwalker. This phase is going to feel like a wall for many groups, but I believe with perseverance, practice and hopefully a little help from this video, you will be able to break through the barrier and get your clear. Let's get into it. I honestly believe this is the halfway point of prog in this encounter, and that the following 3 mechanics are going to take you both time and effort for any aspiring group to get through. Dynamis buffed Omega M opens this segment with Solar Ray, which is a 2-hit heavy tank buster. You can either invuln this or you can tank swap between the hits and both prepare and mitigate for the cast bar of Run Delta version. This is a heavy raid-wide damage into the first of 3 trios in this phase, and it's going to introduce you to a goal that you must meet by the end of phase 5, which is the Stack of Dynamis mechanic. One player will receive a Hello Near World buff, and one player will receive a Hello Far World buff. When these buffs expire, the players will explode for a large circular AoE around them, killing any other player that touches these circles. It's also going to give you a single stack of Dynamis. That's not all though. The Hello Near World buff will then jump onto the closest player to the source, and they too will explode for a much smaller circular AoE, and then the Dynamis will jump again to the closest player, again doing the same thing all over again. The Hello Far World buff will do the exact same thing, but instead of targeting the closest player to the source, it will target the furthest. Doing this correctly should give 6 players one single stack of Dynamis, 3 from the Near World jumps, and 3 from the Far World jumps. Across the entirety of Phase 5, Hello Near World and Hello Far World will accompany other mechanics and must be resolved a total of 4 times, with the end goal of having each player obtain 3 stacks of Dynamis, no more and no less. You're going to need them to tackle the final phase. 6 stacks per encounter of Near and Far World, 4 occurrences, that's 24 stacks in total, so you don't get any extra leeway to mess up. For now, let's break down Run Delta. As the boss leaves, the first thing you will want to do is find the eye floating outside the arena on either the north or south side of the arena and orientate on it immediately. Players will be tethered together with the same close-far tethers that you experienced in Phase 3 Final Omega, and a Near World and Far World buff will be applied to 2 players at random. For now, ignore the Near and Far World buffs and focus solely on your tethers. There are a lot of possible ways to set up the tethers here for this mechanic, but I'm going to explain how my group does it, as I feel that this phase is pretty manageable with our strategy. The 2 green tether pairs stay in the middle of the arena, making horizontal lines. The 2 blue tether pairs will go to the east side of the arena relative to the eye, and line up in 1 close tether pair and 1 far tether pair, like you can see here. Soon, fists are going to spawn behind each player, and they will be signified by either a yellow or a blue colouring on them. You need to have a yellow fist and a blue fist stack on top of each other in order to cancel them out. And within the 4 green tethers, there will always be 2 yellow and 2 blue fists, and the same goes for the 4 blue tethers, 2 yellow and 2 blue fists. For greens, you want to look to the player north or south of you, as they will be your partner in a few moments for stacking up and cancelling out the fists, and you want to ensure that you and them have different coloured fists. If you end up having the same coloured fists, the 2 players that make the northernmost tether of the 2 will swap places, immediately fixing the fist colours. There is no more looking, no more swapping, it's done. Then, the west side players will go and stack on the northwest, and the east side players will go and stack on the southeast. We use markers for precise positioning here, but anything works really. Regarding the blue fists, the 2 players on the south will end up being a pair, and the 2 players on the north will end up being a pair. If you need to do a swap in the same way to fix the fists, the inner tether players will swap because they have less room to go. They can just take a step to the north and south respectively and it's sorted. At this point, the green players should already be stacked in their pairs, but the blues will not. This is because as soon as the tether debuff becomes active, which you can see on the buff timers, the blue tether, which is further away and currently stretched, will immediately break, and then those players can move into their partners respectively to stack the fists. After a few seconds, the fists will spawn small circular AoEs underneath their targeted player, and at that point you can safely move out of them and the mechanic is resolved. At the same time, 6 rotating Omega arms will spawn on the edges of the arena, on the 4 intercardinals and on north and south. Shortly they will aim towards the player closest to them and begin shooting rotating line AoEs in the direction of their spinning arrows. We are going to use 6 players to deal with this. Firstly, all 4 green players will deal with all 4 intercardinal spinners. You remember your initial setup positions before you went into your 2-man stacks. This is also to lock in which spinner you will deal with. So the southwest tether player will deal with the southwest spinner, and vice versa for all 4. You can move to your spinners immediately after the fist AoEs drop, but make sure not to move away from them until you see AoE indicators appear on the floor. The north and south spinners will be baited by the 2 inner blue players, having the secondary benefit of automatically breaking their tether 2 at the correct time. The remaining 2 players are the 2 outer blues, who will move to the middle of the arena and loosely spread, as Omega M will jump on one of the 2 closest players with a pile pitch spread, just like in phase 2 of this encounter. At this point, one random blue tether will receive the same monitor debuff and animation as they did in phase 3, and on this side of the arena, Final Omega will prepare its monitor animation in order to cleave either the north or south side of the room. The green tether players will stay roughly where they are, just move in a little bit from where you baited the spinners, as these 4 players will be getting hit by the monitors from the boss and the debuffed player. The blues will move into the centre of the arena, shuffling a little bit north or south away from wherever Omega's monitor is aiming, and they will stack up for the second hit of the pile pitch. The player that took the initial kick from the pile pitch can stand in line with the other blue players but just go off a bit to the side. The blue monitor player, unless they were initially kicked by Omega M, wants to be a part of this stack, but standing the furthest north or south away from Omega's monitor cleave, facing the 2 green players on their side. After the stack and monitors go off, spin your camera around to look at Beetle Omega, who will be preparing a swivel cannon on one side of the room, signified by the glowing blue lights. This is where Close and Far World need to pay attention to their debuffs at last. Let's arrange positions now. The 2 green players that are already in the safe side are going to stretch their tether all the way to the walls across the arena, and the 2 players that are going to move over to the safe side, they move over, being careful not to break their tether. Once the Twice Come Ruin debuff has dropped from the party from the previous mechanics, which will happen naturally by the time these players make it to the safe side, they can walk in and pop their tether. The Hello Near World player will stand on the safe side wall on the intercardinal close to Beetle Omega. Hello Far World player will stand on the intercardinal wall on the safe side, far from Omega. Near, close, far, far. Easy to remember, right? The 2 green tether players are already positioned north and south, and the remaining 4 players can simply line up on the tether roughly spaced out a little bit. This will successfully resolve the mechanic. One little rule that we used to remember what blue tether players are doing what mechanic, we used to say inny spinny at the start of the mechanic because the in players would go and do the spinnies. So if you can find any simple rules that help you remember things like that, they're very, very useful. Once Omega M is targetable again, the last 2 remaining green tether players can break their tether as soon as the Twice Come Ruin debuff drops off the party. You have about a 4-second window to break the tether, so it's honestly pretty lenient. I believe that Run Delta is the hardest part of this entire fight to learn, so whilst your brain might be in pain right now, practice, give it a few runs, and you will get it soon enough. Another Solar Ray Tank Buster follows this, and shortly afterwards the mechanical slog continues with the cast of Run Sigma, which is a raid wide followed by the boss immediately leaving once more. Each player will receive one of the circle, triangle, X or square coloured PlayStation debuffs that you know from earlier in the encounter, and also the mid or far from phase 2 rears its ugly head once more. Additionally, 2 fists will spawn near the centre of the arena on the intercardinals next to each other, and they will tether the furthest players from them, aiming to eventually shoot them. Final Omega will spawn in the center of the room and target 6 totally random players to also shoot them with single target beams. It's now your job as a group to resolve the requirements of mid-far at the same time as spreading the 6 marked players, whilst also having the 2 unmarked players the furthest away from the fists in order to bait them. It sounds super difficult, but here's how we solved it in an easy way. First of all, we find the hands and run opposite them as a group, and we line up in 4 lines of 2 based on symbol. Then, we assign cardinals to the pairs that have 2 markers on their heads. The quote-unquote first pair in the line gets the north and south spots. The second pair with 2 markers gets east and west. Then, we do the same for the pairs that only have 1 player targeted, but in this case, the first 1 target pair will deal with the left hand. The second 1 target pair will deal with the right hand. To deal with a hand, the marked player will go behind the hand that tether pair will be resolving, and the other player will go to the opposite intercardinal on the other side of the arena. So, as an example, to deal with the left hand, the marked player will be northwest behind the hand and at mid-far distance, and the unmarked player will be southeast at either mid-far distance to bait the hand. We use markers to signify the positioning for mid-distance, but if you want to use different markers, that works too. Any way that you find that you can consistently get mid-distance with your party easily is totally fine. After this, if you have mid, 6 towers will spawn, and if you have far, 5 towers will spawn. They will always spawn in the same setup of 4 towers being on one half of the arena, and the other 1 or 2 towers will be on the other half of the arena. Additionally, you will see rotating circles around the rims of these towers. If there is 1 circle, 1 player must take them. If there are 2 circles, then 2 players must take them. As a further foil, Omega F will knock you back from the center of the arena, and then you need to immediately solve mid or far distance again inside the tower you've been knocked into. Here's how we made it easy. Firstly, we created macros that are posted into the chat at the very start of the trio, based on whether it is mid-distance or far distance. I've included them in the video description, and you can also see them on screen right now if you want to use them yourself. When you are first assigned your PlayStation mark and you line up, either write down or remember whether you are left or right and your symbol. Nothing else matters. Then, you check the macro to see which tower you're going to be taken. Once you're knocked back into the correct tower, if it's mid pattern, stand in the middle of the tower, and if it's far pattern, you stretch the tether away from your tethered partner at the edge of the arena. Done. The biggest issue with solving these towers, in my opinion, is orientating yourself quickly to see where you need to go. A quick tip that really made it easier for me and gave me so much more consistency on this mechanic is that the relative north and south of the tower configurations are always where your group lined up, aka opposite the fists and behind the fists. So you check those 2 markers first, find the 4 tower cluster, and then you know where every tower is, and as a result where you need to go. Next up comes the third and thankfully final part of Run Sigma, which is where the Hello Near and Hello Far World buffs come into play once more. Omega F will spawn, and she is to be the group's new relative north, so look for her quickly. Additionally, an Omega Beam axis will spawn in the center of the arena and telegraph a clockwise or anti-clockwise rotation to come shortly. 3 players with 1 Dynamis stack, and also no near or far Hello World buff, need to go north near Omega F, and the other 5 remaining players will go south opposite her. We selected those 3 players going north by just having 1 member of the group call the 3 chosen players. You could do that, or you could mark 3 players' heads, you could write it in party chat, or you could even potentially go off priority systems or party lists, whatever works for you and your group. There are so many ways you can do this. All that matters is that 3 players with 1 Dynamis stack goes north, and the rest goes south. What results is 3 players with no near or far world buff on north, and 3 players with no near or far debuff on south. with each group standing behind the direction the rotating beam will go in when it shoots across north and south momentarily. Those 3 players on each side should line up on the wall, spread out a little bit to create a mini conga line. Your end goal is to get players into the positions outlined in this image. So you see here, at north, the first and the third player in the conga line will go to the north side into cardinals, and the middle one will stand directly north. On the south side, the 2 players in front will follow the rotating laser and then be spread a little bit on the wall on the west or east cardinal, depending in which direction the rotating beam goes, because you just follow it, and the third player will stay south. Lastly, the Hello Far World player will be on the south, 4 circles in from the edge on the line, and the Hello Near World player will follow the laser with those 2 players and stand on the cardinal, 4 circles in from the edge once more. There's one last thing to bear in mind. While you are in your conga lines, before you go to your spots, Omega F will be preparing one of those telegraph mechanics that you've seen so many times at the start of Phase 2, where she will either do a plus-shaped AoE or 2 side-swiping AoEs, rendering either the corners just left and right of the middle safe on north-south, or the middle itself safe on north-south. So what essentially happens is once you've done your conga line and you know where you're going, you either need to wait before you start following the laser, or you need to immediately follow the laser into the safe middle zone and then go to your spots, depending on which attack she is telegraphing. Then, when you are in these positions, the Dynamis stacks will hop around correctly and resolve the mechanic. As a note, it is also recommended to avoid the tank that is currently tanking the boss taking the final jump ever, because right now the Vol will occasionally kill them. So try to ensure that the first jump is always taken by a tank rather than the second jump. This is consistently doable once you are comfortable. After all of this, Omega will do another one of the same tank buster you've seen twice this phase so far, so you can either cool down or invuln it, and then Omega will begin to cast Run Omega, another huge raid-wide damage that will lead into the final trio of this phase. We're almost there! The boss will be targetable for the first section of this trio, so don't stop attacking. You should even get a 2-minute window during this period. Final Omega will spawn in the center of the arena, and one set of Omega MNF will spawn on opposite intercardinals from one another and begin to channel their same Phase 2 attacks that you've seen so many times before, even in the previous trios. And then shortly after, another 2 will spawn on the other 2 intercardinals. I'm not going into the details of how these attacks telegraph because they'll be included in my Phase 2 guide, and to be honest, if you're at this point in Phase 5, you've seen them probably hundreds of times. Final Omega will begin to channel a diffuse wave cannon alongside this. If you don't recognise this mechanic from O12S, the sides of Omega where the light orbs are the safe sides to stand. You want to be standing on the light orbs, essentially. You need to solve the mechanics from the MNF that first spawned at the same time as the diffuse wave cannon. And then a few seconds after that, the second MNF will resolve their mechanics with a new safe spot, and at the same time a second diffuse wave cannon will shoot in the directions that previously were not aimed at, so the safe spots will now become unsafe. We used a couple of rules to break down this mechanic to make it easier to solve, because the issue with this mechanic is that whilst it's simple, it's very fast, so you need to become very good at discerning the patterns. Firstly, the second safe spot is always 90 degrees away from the first on either the left or right side. Secondly, there are only 4 possible patterns, which are as follows. Out and legs equals pizza slice in on female. In and legs equals pizza slice in on male. Out and plus equals near the male but leaning away from him. In and plus means next to the male. For the 2 non-pizza slice spots, we use our markers once more to designate the safe spots. On or just past the markers are safe, but if you want to use different markers, other methods will work. Luckily, this is one of those mechanics where as soon as one player becomes incredibly comfortable with it, you can usually consistently get through just on following while you're still learning it yourself. After these 2 dodges, the boss will leave once more. I want to make a note here that while you are practicing this mechanic, you should be tank LBing it, because your players will not die to messing this mechanic up, they'll instead receive a damage down. It's not going to allow you to progress and clear and get through phase 6, but it will allow you to practice the next part of this phase consistently, and I think that's worth it until your group is comfortable. Now is when you want to pay attention to your debuffs. 2 players will have Hello Near World, and one of them will have a first in line, one of them will have a second in line. And also 2 players will have a Hello Far World, with once again a first and second in line. Additionally, Final Omega will spawn and begin channeling its monitors once more, meaning that 2 players will need to take those hits and the other 6 players will need to use the other half of the arena to resolve the Dynamis jumps. The 2 players that need to be sent over to deal with monitors are 2 2-stack players that do not have a Hello World buff here at all. You can use the same marking or player callout system as before to designate this, whatever works for your group. Out of the remaining 4 players that do not have a first in line Hello World, you need to send 2 to the edge of the arena on the opposite side away from the monitors, and you need to send 1 on the edge of the arena on the east and west side respectively, just a little bit away from the monitors to not be targeted by the cleaves. The Hello Near World player will complete the Mickey Mouse with those 2 players opposite the monitors and stand on the 4th circle in. The Hello Far World player will do the same, 4 circles in front of either the east or west player. Either one works, so whichever's easier for you is fine. After these Dynamis jumps go off, you will end up with 2 players with 3 stacks and 6 players with 2 stacks if you've done it correctly up until now. Beetle Omega will spawn once more and will shoot out 2 blaster tethers immediately that will latch onto players. You will recognise this from phase 1 because at this point you've probably done that phase 500 plus times. And those 2 3-stack players want to immediately go in and grab those tethers and pull them to the left and right side of Omega respectively, staying fairly close in order to leave as much space as possible for the remaining 6 players to resolve the final instance of the Hello World Dynamis jumps. This part is really easy because you simply do the exact same setup as you just did before. You make the Mickey Mouse with the Hello World close and 2 players, and then you do 2 east and west players untargeted and 1 player further in with the Hello Far World. Exactly the same as you did before. You do it twice, the same thing. You have so much time to deal with this that assigning players is super easy. I intentionally ensured that in second trio and both instances of third trio, the setup for the Dynamis jumps is completely identical, so you can practice and get used to where players need to be very early and very often to make sure that it's easy to memorize. Once this is done, there is simply one final tank buster for you to deal with. At this point, all 8 players should have 3 stacks of Dynamis, and you simply need to push the boss below 20% to trigger the phase 6 transition without wiping the party. One small note is that Limit Break 3 is a requirement at the start of phase 6, so you cannot use it here to meet the check if you intend on clearing or progging the final phase. I know this phase looks like a lot on the whole, but once you break through, there's only one more phase standing between you and victory, so it's not too bad, it's not too bad. One more thing I'd like to note is that once the DPS check is met, once the boss is sub 20%, you first of all want to set your camera north, and second of all, you need to mitigate the transition damage. A simple Sucker Soil reprisal is easily enough. You don't need heavy mitigation, but you do need full top and shield. The reason you want to set your camera north is because when you pull phase 6, the camera does not reset into a default position, it stays where you were before. So if, for example, you are looking south, when you pull phase 6, the camera will have you looking out the edge of the arena, which is definitely not ideal. Thank you so much for watching, friends. I really hope this guide was at least a little bit helpful to you. Best of luck on your prog, and if you get through this part of the fight, please feel free to check out my final phase guide to have a fantastic rest of your day. Good luck.